My name is Aaron Brooks, and for the past 2 years I've lived most of my waking hours one step behind Lucas Hartwell, the man who, without ever trying, rewrote the rules of my carefully ordered life. At 29, I prided myself on professionalism. I wasn't the kind of driver who blurred lines, who imagined relationships where there were none. Boundaries were essential in my line of work, as critical to survival as checking my mirrors or knowing the quickest way across the city during rush hour. Wealthy clients didn't hire me for conversation or companionship. They wanted discretion, reliability, and silence. I had perfected the art of being present without being noticed. At least I had. Until Lucas Hartwell. Lucas was unlike any client I had ever driven for. As the founder and CEO of Hartwell Cybersecurity Solutions, he was everything his reputation suggested. Brilliant, methodical, intensely private. But he was also, God help me, kind. The sort of quiet, thoughtful kindness that slipped under your defenses before you even realized it was happening. He remembered details most men like him would have forgotten the moment they were spoken. When my niece had appendicitis last year, he asked about her recovery the next time I picked him up. When my mother was hospitalized with pneumonia, he insisted I take a week off to be with her, at full pay. And there were the smaller things too. The way he always offered me a portion of his dinner when we returned late from client meetings. The way he made sure my vehicle was maintained to the highest standard, not for his comfort, but for mine. It was infuriating, disarming, dangerous. Because somewhere along the way, despite every professional instinct screaming otherwise, I'd fallen for him. Not that I would ever admit it. Not even to myself on most days. I wore my professionalism like armor, never letting my admiration bleed through the friendly smiles and crisp good mornings. I became adept at hiding the way my heart caught when he ran a hand through his perpetually tousled dark hair, or how my breath quickened when he gave one of those rare, genuine smiles that made his navy blue eyes spark and crinkle at the corners. Lucas Hartwell was, objectively speaking, an attractive man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of effortless masculine grace that bespoke old money and years of quiet self-discipline. His suits were always impeccably tailored but never ostentatious, his shoes polished but practical. There was an ease to him, a groundedness that set him apart from the polished executives I had served before. And beneath that calm exterior, there was an intensity, a focus, that could be unsettling if you found yourself on the wrong end of it. I saw it often from the front seat of the sleek black Mercedes S-Class he insisted I drive. How his jaw tightened when reviewing quarterly reports on his tablet. How his brow furrowed during high-stakes negotiations. Yet just as often, I caught glimpses of something gentler. A soft smile at a child playing in the park. A lingering look out the window at a storm rolling in over the bay. These glimpses, these contradictions, were my undoing. Still, I kept my distance. I knew where I stood, where I had to stand. I was his driver. Trusted, yes. Perhaps even liked. But not that. Not someone he would ever see as more. There were signs, of course, that he preferred women. Occasional mentions of ex-girlfriends. Nothing recent, nothing serious, but enough to build the wall higher around my own foolish heart. Women at galas and fundraisers flirted with him openly, and he responded with polite if detached charm. I told myself that was just who he was. Courteous, distant, focused on his work. I told myself it didn't matter. It mattered. Our routine was finely tuned by now, a rhythm we both seemed to understand without needing to discuss it. Each morning, at 7:30 sharp, I pulled up outside his downtown apartment building. Lucas would emerge, coffee in hand, tablet tucked under one arm, and slide into the back seat with a nod of greeting. From there, the day unfolded predictably. Meetings across the city, site visits to client locations, occasional detours to favored restaurants or coffee shops. I knew his preferences. Black coffee, minimal cream, rare steak, no sauces. Pinot Noir if he was feeling indulgent, and aged Scotch if he was not. Sometimes he worked in silence, tapping away at his laptop or fielding terse calls with department heads. Other times he made small talk about traffic patterns, weather forecasts, even the occasional dry joke that hinted at a mischievous streak beneath his stoic exterior. I lived for those moments, They were rare, precious as pearls, and I hoarded them shamelessly in the quiet hours of the night when I lay awake wondering what it would be like if things were different, if I were someone else, if he were. But fantasies were dangerous. I had built a life on pragmatism, on keeping my head down and doing my job well. Lucas trusted me because I respected the invisible line between us, a line I could never, would, never cross, even when the ache of it, the longing, the what-if, threatened to hollow me out from the inside. So I drove him. I waited. I watched from a distance, content with what scraps I could gather from the table of his life. A smile here, a word of thanks there. It was enough. It had to be, because anything more was impossible, or so I thought. It was supposed to be a routine. Evening. Lucas had a dinner scheduled with a potential client. A big one, he'd said in his usual understated way, and asked me to be on standby at Archer's, a discreet and exclusive steakhouse tucked into the financial district. I knew the place. I'd waited outside its polished glass doors more times than I could count, engine idling, watching the city shift from dusk to night. Probably a late one, Lucas had warned that morning, sliding into the back seat with his usual coffee in hand. Donovan's not known for quick deals. No problem, I'd said, offering him a small smile through the rearview mirror. I'm here, as long as you need. And I meant it. I always meant it. At 7:45 p.m., I parked in the designated driver's lot behind Archer's, sent Lucas the standard text, "Here, whenever you're ready, no rush," and settled in for what I expected to be a couple of hours of boredom. I queued up a podcast, adjusted my seat, and tried not to think about how the autumn rain had started tapping steadily against the windshield. Hawk passed. Then 9 fakut. Then 10 papus. Each passing hour stretched the thin thread of normalcy tauter, my gut knotting tighter with every minute. Lucas wasn't a man prone to excess. He was efficient, always aware of time, always balancing obligations. The longer he stayed inside without so much as a quick check-in, the more uneasy I became. Still, I kept my seat. Loyalty wasn't passive. It was waiting through discomfort, through doubt, because trust had been placed in you, and you didn't abandon that lightly. At 10:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. I snatched it up faster than I'd like to admit. Lucas. Running long. Important meeting. Might be another hour. Sorry to keep you. A rush of relief cooled my nerves. At least he was communicating. I texted back immediately. No problem. I'm here as long as needed. The rain grew heavier. Streetlights blurred into halos, the city, softening around the edges. Inside the car, it was warm, insulated. But my mind kept pacing restless circuits. Something felt off. At 11:03 p.m., another message. Finalizing things now. Almost done. I sat up straighter, an anticipatory tightness in my chest. Almost done. Good. We could get him home, and I could stop imagining worst-case scenarios. At 11:27 p.m., a sharp knock on my driver's side window jolted me. A valet, a young man I vaguely recognized from previous nights at Archer's, stood outside, rain slicking his hair against his forehead. His polite smile faltered slightly when I rolled down the window. "Are you waiting for Mr. Hartwell?" he asked. "Yes." Instantly alert, I studied his expression. A careful blend of professionalism and concern. "You might want to come inside," the valet said, lowering his voice. "He's had a lot to celebrate." My stomach dropped. I killed the engine, grabbing my jacket from the passenger seat as I stepped out into the rain. The interior of Archer's was all muted golds and mahogany, low lighting designed to flatter expensive suits and aging egos. I shook off the rain at the entrance, nodding to the maitre d' who greeted me with the strained smile of someone who recognized trouble when he saw it. "Mr. Hartwell is in the private room at the back," he said, already leading me through the maze of linen-draped tables. Behind frosted glass doors, their outlines blurred, I saw 2 figures. One of them slumped in his chair, looser, more relaxed than I'd ever seen Lucas. The maitre d' knocked once, discreetly, before pushing the door open. "Sir," he murmured, stepping aside to let me enter. I stepped into a scene that would imprint itself on my mind far more deeply than it should have. Lucas sat at the head of the table, jacket abandoned over a nearby chair, tie loosened, hair delightfully disheveled. His smile, wide and unguarded, split his normally composed features as he lifted a half-empty wine glass in an exaggerated toast. Across from him, Richard Donovan, the elusive shipping magnate Lucas had been courting for months, laughed heartily, clapping Lucas on the back with an easy camaraderie that spoke of a deal well sealed. "There he is!" Lucas crowed when he spotted me, waving his glass dangerously close to spilling. "My knight in shining leather seats." I blinked, caught entirely off guard. "Celebrating?" I asked carefully, scanning the table laden with empty wine bottles and half-eaten steaks. "Secured the biggest contract of the quarter," Lucas said, his words a touch too deliberate, like he knew he needed to sound sober and was failing spectacularly. "Donovan's entire fleet, ours now. Security systems, consulting, maintenance, everything." "Congratulations," I said genuinely, stepping closer, ready to steady him if needed. Richard Donovan pushed to his feet with the exaggerated care of a man trying very hard not to seem drunk. "Your boss is one hell of a negotiator," he said, grinning broadly. "Looking forward to working with you, Hartwell." "Likewise," Lucas managed, rising unsteadily to shake his hand. It was clear Donovan's driver, or the restaurant's courtesy service, had already been arranged, because within moments the maitre d' was ushering Donovan discreetly out the back entrance, leaving Lucas swaying slightly beside the table. I reached for his jacket, draping it over my arm. "Ready to go, sir?" I asked quietly, maintaining the facade of professionalism even as concern gnawed at my gut. Lucas nodded, then winced as if the motion unsettled him. "Not my finest hour," he muttered as he lurched toward the door. I stepped close, subtly offering support without making it obvious to the lingering restaurant staff. Outside, the rain had thickened into a steady downpour, the night cool and slick, with the promise of autumn. Lucas inhaled deeply, the damp air misting around him, and staggered slightly. I caught his arm without thinking. "Careful," I murmured, guiding him toward the waiting car. "I'm fine," Lucas insisted, though he didn't pull away from my steadying grip. In the muted glow of the street lamps, with rain dripping from his unruly hair and the edges of his expensive suit clinging wetly to his frame, he looked almost younger, softer, breakable. The drive home would be longer tonight. Not because of traffic, but because for the first time since I met him, Lucas Hartwell wasn't the composed, untouchable figure I'd built walls around. He was just a man, and I was just a man too, standing dangerously close to a line I wasn't sure I could walk away from anymore. The valet had already pulled the car to the curb by the time we stepped out into the rain, a sleek shadow against the glistening pavement. I kept one hand light on Lucas's elbow, a steadying presence more than an overt support. He walked like a man determined to pretend he was sober, his long strides a little too deliberate, his balance just a little too precarious. The rain clung to everything, clothes, hair, skin, seeping into the spaces between us, making the world feel hushed and strangely intimate. Streetlights reflected off the wet asphalt in smeared halos, the city breathing in low, misty exhales. Lucas inhaled deeply as we reached the car, tilting his face up toward the rain like it might sober him, ground him somehow. For a moment, he simply stood there, the drops streaking down his face, flattening his hair against his forehead, soaking through the fine fabric of his shirt. Then he staggered. Reflexively, I stepped forward, catching him around the waist before he could fall. He was warm beneath the drenched fabric, the heat of his body bleeding through into my hands, my arms. He smelled faintly of rain and scotch and something distinctly him, clean, sharp, painfully familiar. "I'm fine," Lucas muttered, but he made no move to push me away. "You're not," I said quietly, guiding him toward the open rear door. He sank into the seat with a heavy exhale, leaning his head back against the leather, eyes closed. I closed the door with a soft click, ran around to the driver's side, and slid behind the wheel, shaking the rain from my hair. The interior lights glowed dimly for a second before fading, plunging us into a cocoon of darkness and whispered rain. "Home?" I asked, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. Lucas opened his eyes slowly, meeting my gaze with a tired nod. "Yeah, please." I started the engine and pulled carefully away from the curb, the tires hissing against the slick street. For a few minutes, the car was filled with nothing but the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers and the steady, insistent beat of the rain. I drove slower than usual, cautious. Lucas seemed half asleep, his head lolling slightly with the motion of the car. We were about halfway home when a sharp sound from the back seat made me glance in the mirror. Lucas had straightened abruptly, his hand pressed to his mouth, his face pale even in the dim light. "Pull over," he managed hoarsely. I reacted instantly, signaling and easing the car toward the shoulder. The moment the wheels bumped to a stop, Lucas fumbled with the door handle, shoving it open and half falling out of the car. I killed the engine and unbuckled, already moving. By the time I reached him, he was crouched beside the open door, one hand braced against the wet asphalt, the other gripping the edge of the seat as he heaved, the sound of retching cutting sharply through the rain. Stood there, helpless for a moment, heart clenching painfully in my chest. Then I shrugged off my jacket and held it out over him as best I could, shielding him from the worst of the downpour. "It's okay," I murmured, crouching beside him, one hand lightly on his back. "Just breathe. It'll pass." He said nothing, too lost in misery. His body shuddered with each convulsion, and all I could do was stay close, steady, a silent, immovable presence beside him. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few agonizing minutes, he slumped back onto his heels, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. His shoulders sagged, rain dripping from his hair, his shirt plastered to his skin. "God," he rasped, voice thick with humiliation. "I'm sorry." "Don't," I said immediately, handing him a clean handkerchief I kept in my back pocket. "No apologies." He took it with trembling fingers, dabbing at his face. His eyes flicked up to mine, raw and miserable in the dark. "This isn't exactly my finest hour," he said, a hollow attempt at humor. "You're human," I said simply. He laughed, a broken sound, and pushed himself shakily to his feet. I rose with him, steadying him when he wavered. The contact between us, a hand on his arm, his weight leaning subtly against me, felt more intimate than anything I had ever experienced. Not sexual, not yet. Something deeper. A wordless surrender of pride, of control. A trust so unguarded it was almost unbearable. I guided him carefully back into the car, shutting the door gently behind him, then circled around to the driver's seat once more. My jacket was soaked, my clothes clinging to me, but I barely felt it. Inside the car, the air was heavy with the scent of rain and the faint, acrid tang of sickness. I turned the heater up, cracked the windows slightly, and handed Lucas a bottle of water from the center console. "Small sips," I instructed softly. He obeyed without protest, taking tiny, careful drinks. The drive resumed, but everything had changed. Rain blurred the world outside into a smear of gray and gold, the city slipping past unseen. Inside the car, the silence was thick, charged with everything we weren't saying. I risked a glance in the mirror. Lucas sat slumped in the back seat, head resting against the window, the bottle of water cradled loosely in his lap. His eyes were closed, lashes dark against his pale cheeks, mouth slightly parted. Vulnerable. So achingly vulnerable it hollowed out my chest. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, fighting the urge to pull over again. Not because he was sick, but because I didn't trust myself to sit here in the darkness with all these feelings pressing against my ribs, desperate to be let out. I had crossed an invisible line tonight, not in action, in heart. There was no coming back from it now. By the time we pulled into the underground garage beneath his apartment building, the rain had lessened to a misty drizzle. Parked carefully in his reserved spot, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, gathering myself. Then I turned to look at him. "Lucas," I said gently. He stirred, blinking groggily. "We're home." He nodded, sluggish but aware. I opened my door and came around to his side once more, helping him out of the car with careful hands. He didn't resist. He didn't pretend he didn't need me. His weight leaned into mine, solid and warm, as we crossed the threshold into the elevator bay. The night felt suspended in amber, fragile and shimmering. 1,000 unsaid words hung between us, unspoken and maybe unrecognizable even to him, but I felt them. Every heavy breath, every hesitant step, every stolen glance. And I knew, without understanding how or why, that nothing between us would ever be the same again. The elevator doors slid, opened directly into Lucas's penthouse, a minimalist space of sharp lines, soft lighting, and wall-to-wall windows overlooking the glittering city below. I'd been here countless times before, dropping him off, waiting while he grabbed a forgotten file, occasionally running up to hand-deliver keys or a phone left behind. Always in and out, always maintaining the boundary that said, "You don't belong inside." Tonight, that line blurred and vanished like mist. Lucas stumbled as he crossed the threshold, his hand shooting out to grip the nearest wall for balance. I was at his side in an instant, looping an arm carefully around his waist, feeling the tremble in his muscles, the weakness that would have horrified him if he were fully himself. "Come on," I murmured, my voice soft. "Let's get you cleaned up." He didn't argue. He simply nodded, his head tipping forward slightly like it weighed too much to hold up. I guided him through the silent apartment, past the sleek leather furniture, the abstract paintings, the soft murmur of rain against glass. Each step felt heavy, laden with meaning I didn't dare examine too closely. In the hallway, Lucas stumbled again, barely catching himself against the wall. Without hesitation, I bent to hook his arm around my shoulders, tightening my hold. "You're all right," I said, though my heart hammered in my throat. "You're all right, I've got you." He mumbled something, maybe an apology, maybe just my name, but I didn't ask him to repeat it. I just kept moving. We reached the master bedroom, a cavernous space softened by a king-sized bed with charcoal gray linens and heavy curtains drawn back from the rain-spattered windows. The room smelled faintly of clean laundry and the subtle cologne Lucas wore, a scent that had embedded itself into my memory long ago. I maneuvered him toward the bed, helping him sit down heavily on the edge. He sat there, swaying slightly, his head bowed, fingers fumbling uselessly at the knot of his ruined tie. He started, but trailed off, defeated. "I'll help," I said before he could find the words. And just like that, another invisible wall between us crumbled. I stepped between his knees, my hand steady, even as my heart stumbled wildly in my chest. I reached for the tie first, fingers brushing the damp fabric of his collarbone as I loosened the knot. He smelled of rain and sweat and the lingering sharpness of alcohol, but beneath it all was something warmer, something achingly familiar. Slipped the tie free, letting it fall to the floor. Next came his jacket, soaked and heavy, clinging to his frame. "Arms up," I instructed gently. Lucas obeyed, sluggish and trusting. His movements had lost their usual precision, reduced now to the slow compliance of exhaustion and illness. I peeled the jacket from his shoulders, feeling the solid weight of him, the heat radiating from his body even through the layers. I laid the jacket carefully over a chair, then turned back to him. His dress shirt was a mess, rumpled, stained with rain and traces of his earlier sickness. His fingers plucked clumsily at the buttons, failing to make any progress. "Let me," I said. Again, my voice low. Button by button, I worked my way up, the fabric parting under my hands. With each small reveal of skin, his collarbone, his chest, the faint trail of dark hair leading downward, I fought to keep my focus clinical, detached. This wasn't about desire. This was about care, about loyalty, about the quiet, unbreakable thread of something deeper that neither of us dared name. When the last button slipped free, I eased the shirt off his shoulders, revealing a white undershirt clinging damply to his skin. That too was stained and rumpled. And when I hesitated, Lucas gave a tiny, miserable shrug. "Off," he muttered. I nodded, reaching for the hem of the undershirt, pulling it carefully over his head. He lifted his arms obediently, wincing as the movement pulled at stiff muscles. Bare-chested now, Lucas looked up at me through half-lidded eyes, and something inside me twisted sharply. He wasn't the polished CEO anymore. He wasn't the infallible, untouchable man who conquered boardrooms and charmed impossible clients. He was just Lucas, human, exhausted, vulnerable, and so beautiful in his imperfection. There were scars on his torso I'd never seen before, One thin, pale line near his ribs, another near his collarbone. Traces of old battles, old stories he'd never told. His skin was warm under the faint chill of the air, and I forced myself to look away, busying my hands with locating something clean for him to wear. Dresser, Lucas mumbled, tipping his chin, toward a sleek chest of drawers against the wall. Second drawer. I found a soft, worn gray t-shirt and returned, helping him pull it over his head. He leaned heavily against me during the process, his breath warm against my cheek, his fingers brushing clumsily against my forearm. Next came his trousers, still damp from the rain. "You want to stand?" I asked quietly. He nodded, though his legs trembled slightly as he rose. I crouched, undoing his belt, my fingers steady even as my heart raced, unzipping his trousers, easing them down carefully, helping him step out of them. It was an act of pure care, and yet the intimacy of it, the trust, hit me like a blow. I found a pair of dark sweatpants folded neatly in the same drawer, helped him step into them, and pulled them up gently. When it was done, when he was clothed again in something dry and soft, I guided him back onto the bed, lowering him carefully until he lay sprawled against the pillows. He exhaled a shaky breath, turning his face into the pillow. "Water?" I asked, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead. He nodded, eyes closed. I fetched a glass from the ensuite bathroom, returned to find him half asleep already. I touched his shoulder lightly, and he stirred enough to accept the water, sipping it slowly under my watchful gaze. "You're a good man, Aaron," he mumbled, setting the glass aside with clumsy fingers. "Better than I deserve." The words, slurred and soft, hit me harder than they should have. "You deserve to be taken care of," I said quietly, smoothing the comforter. "Over him. Everyone does." Lucas's eyes fluttered open, searching my face. There was something there, something raw and unguarded that made me want to look away, but couldn't. "Stay," he whispered. My throat closed up. I swallowed hard against the lump that rose there. "I'll stay," I promised. I turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into a hush broken only by the whisper of rain against glass and the slow, steady breathing of the man I'd sworn I would never, ever fall for. And yet, somewhere in the stillness of that fragile night, the last defenses between us crumbled silently away. I woke to the low hum of movement, the clink of ceramic against marble, the distant whisper of the coffee machine sputtering to life. Blinking against the soft morning light filtering through the massive windows, I sat up on the sleek leather sofa, disoriented for a moment. Then the memories came flooding back. The rain, Lucas leaning against me, the quiet exhaustion in his eyes, the soft, broken request, "Stay." Rubbing the stiffness from my neck, I stood and followed the faint sounds into the kitchen. Lucas stood at the counter, his back to me, wearing the same gray t-shirt and sweatpants I'd dressed him in hours before. His hair was rumpled, sticking up at odd angles, and his movements were careful, as if each motion required more effort than usual. He heard my footsteps and turned, offering a tentative, tired smile. "Morning," he rasped, voice still hoarse from the night before. "Morning," I echoed, suddenly awkward. I shifted from foot to foot, unsure whether to step closer or retreat. Lucas turned back to the coffee machine, poured 2 mugs, and slid one across the counter to me. "Black, right?" he asked, a flicker of the usual Lucas emerging. "Right. Thanks," I murmured, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, grateful for something to anchor myself. For a moment, we sipped in silence, the only sounds the rain still drizzling, softly against the windows and the faint tick of the wall clock. The air between us was different now, thicker, charged with everything left unsaid in the early hours of the morning. Finally, Lucas set his mug down with a deliberate care and met my gaze. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't," I said automatically. "You were celebrating. It happens." "It's not just about getting drunk," Lucas said, his voice low, rough. "It's everything else." I frowned slightly, unsure where he was going. "I remember more than I probably should," he admitted, a ghost of a smile flickering across his Lips. I remember you helping me, getting me into bed, staying when I asked. You weren't exactly in a state to be alone, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice light. Lucas nodded, then hesitated, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. And I remember thinking, he continued slowly, that you were the one person I wanted there, not just because I needed someone, but because I needed you. The words hung there, delicate and trembling, waiting for the slightest breeze to shatter them. I swallowed hard, my heart slamming painfully against my ribs. Lucas, I said quietly. You were drunk. You weren't thinking clearly. He huffed a soft laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. I was drunk, he agreed. But that didn't make the thoughts new. It just stripped away my ability to hide them. I stared at him, disbelieving, afraid to hope, afraid to even imagine that what I thought I heard might be real. You're my boss, I said, the words spilling out in a rush. It's complicated. Power dynamics, ethics. And I thought, I know, he interrupted gently. Believe me, I know all the reasons why it's a terrible idea. He stepped around the counter slowly, stopping a few feet away, close enough that I could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the vulnerability etched deep into his face. But none of that changes the fact that for 2 years, I've been fighting something I didn't want to admit, he said, voice steady despite the rawness in it. Something that got harder to ignore every time you smiled, every time you waited, without complaint, every time you treated me like a man instead of a title. I shook my head, half in wonder, half in denial. This doesn't make sense, I whispered. You date women. Lucas gave a soft, rueful smile. I've dated women, he corrected. But it was never simple for me, never right in the way I thought it should be. He took another careful step closer. You make it feel right, he said simply. The mug in my hands felt absurdly heavy. I set it down before I could drop it, flexing my fingers to hide their trembling. I don't want to make a mistake, I said, voice low and rough. I don't want you to wake up tomorrow and regret this. Lucas shook his head immediately, a fierce kind of certainty burning behind the weariness. I don't regret it, he said. If anything, I regret not saying something sooner. He took one more step, close enough now that I could feel the residual heat of his body in the cool morning air. I'm not asking for anything from you, he added. I don't want you to feel trapped. If you want to walk away, if you want to pretend none of this happened, I'll respect that. Completely. I looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time since we met, I saw past the careful walls he always kept around himself. There was no polished CEO here, no guarded public face, just Lucas, tired, hopeful, terrified, like me. I don't want to walk away, I said, the words shaking free of me before I could stop them. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, he said, a small, self-deprecating smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. But maybe we figure it out together. A beat of silence. The rain whispering against the glass. 2 hearts thundering into the unknown. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Lucas extended his hand toward me, palm up, offering, not demanding, not assuming, just offering. My throat burned. I reached out, my fingers curling into his palm, anchoring us both to something terrifying and brand new. In the dim, rain-washed light of the kitchen, hope and fear collided inside me. And for once, hope won. The hand I held was warm, a little unsteady, but real, solid in a way that left no room for doubt. Lucas didn't say anything else for a long moment, and neither did I. Words suddenly felt fragile compared to the simple fact of touch, the weight of everything shifting silently between us. Finally, he gave my fingers a small, almost nervous squeeze, and withdrew his hand carefully, like he was afraid of pushing too far, too fast. I meant what I said, he said, his voice a little hoarse. But I don't want to complicate your life, or mine, without being sure this is something you want too. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, a shaky laugh escaping before I could stop it. "You're not exactly a complication," I said, managing a half smile. "More like an opportunity I never thought I'd have." Lucas's mouth quirked. At that, a real smile, tired but genuine. Still, we both knew it wasn't that simple. He was my boss. I was his employee. There were risks, personal, professional, emotional. But standing there, with the pale morning light spilling across the marble floor and the rain soft against the windows, those risks somehow seemed less terrifying than they had just minutes ago. "I don't want you to feel like you have to quit," Lucas said carefully. "I would never ask that." I nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind the offer. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting me, my career, my dignity. "Maybe eventually," I said, if this becomes something more. But not right away. Not before we even know what this is." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Slow," he said. "Cautious." "Careful," I agreed. "And honest," Lucas added, a little smile ghosting across his mouth. "No pretending this didn't happen." "No pretending," I echoed. A strange, quiet peace settled between us then. Not the tense silence of uncertainty, but the kind that comes from mutual understanding, from shared vulnerability. It felt fragile, new, precious. Lucas scrubbed a hand through his hair, wincing slightly. "God, I need food," he muttered. "And caffeine. A lot of caffeine." I barked a soft laugh, the tension finally breaking. "You look like you could use both," I teased gently. He grinned, that dry, self-deprecating humor shining through despite the lingering pallor of his hangover. "I know a place that delivers life-saving breakfast," he said, already reaching for his phone. "They specialize in greasy miracles." "Perfect," I said, sliding onto one of the tall stools at the kitchen counter. Lucas placed the order, something about bacon, eggs, hash browns, and a gallon of black coffee, then set his phone down and leaned heavily against the counter across from me. The easy silence between us felt different now. Lighter. I sipped my coffee, watching him through the rising steam. He looked nothing like the composed CEO the world knew. His t-shirt wrinkled, his hair wild, the faint shadow of stubble roughening his jaw. But to me, he had never looked more real, more human, more reachable. He caught me looking and raised an eyebrow, a slow, knowing smile tugging at his mouth. "What?" he asked. I shook my head, feeling a flush creep up the back of my neck. "Nothing. Just taking it all in." He tilted his head, studying me in return. "Feels different," he said softly. "It is different," I agreed. A heartbeat, a breath, hope, cautious and tentative, weaving itself into the spaces between us. Breakfast arrived 20 minutes later, a mountain of food packed into paper bags that smelled like heaven. We dug in with the kind of ravenous hunger only hangovers and sleepless nights could produce, laughing quietly when Lucas spilled coffee on his already ruined shirt and muttered something about losing all professional dignity. The laughter wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It was real. And somewhere between bites of greasy bacon and mouthfuls of buttery toast, I realized something that sent a soft ache blooming behind my ribs. The wall between us, the invisible, untouchable line I had lived behind for 2 years, was gone. Not demolished in some grand, reckless explosion, not shattered by passion or drunken impulse, but carefully, quietly disassembled brick by brick, replaced by something tender and uncertain and real. Something we were both building together, cautious but willing. After breakfast, we drifted back into the living room, settling onto opposite ends of the wide leather sofa like two magnets pulled closer by an unseen force. Lucas leaned his head back, closing his eyes briefly. "You know," he said after a moment, "we're going to screw this up at least a dozen times." I smiled, letting my head tip back against the cushion too. "Probably more." He cracked one eye open, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Still worth it?" I turned my head, meeting his gaze across the expanse of the sofa. "Yeah," I said simply, "still worth it. We sat there like that for a while, letting the morning stretch around us, the rain easing into a soft mist outside, the world beginning again. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we would weather the challenges ahead, or if this fragile new thing between us would survive the real world pressing back in. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. I wasn't hiding behind professionalism, or pretending my heart didn't ache for more. Lucas Hartwell, the man I had admired from a careful distance for 2 years, had reached across the divide, and I had taken his hand. Whatever came next, we would cross it together.